everyone, and welcome to Overwatch Lately, the show where we talk about what's been happening in Overwatch lately. Today is going to be a little bit different than all the other shows. So if you're a first-time viewer, you're in for a special treat because all you're getting is me today. Usually, I interview a guest, and we go over opinions and stuff like that. But today, I'm just going to monologue through the whole thing, share my opinions about a lot of things going on, including what a lot of people are probably already thinking about. But before we get to that, we're going to talk about some news first. So something that is near and dear to my heart is the Overwatch Contenders Gauntlet. Overwatch Contenders just in general, and the Gauntlet's been going on for the last 2 days. Me and a bunch of buddies have been streaming it, co-streaming it, Lemon and Heurix. We've gotten some cool product ideas like Jundies. Check it out as well. But this is a tournament where all of the best of Tier 2 have come together and are trying to shine. And what's really cool is that 13 out of 20 Overwatch League teams are there scouting out players. We can kind of decide who the 13 are, but I'm sure the reason why they're not there is for a good reason. Either they already have a roster that they're looking good for or not really looking for anyone else to add. But just to go over what's happened at the tournament so far, we've already gotten through the first bracket, which is the first elimination phase. We've lost 2 teams, LGE Huya and HSL Esports. So China and Europe are no longer represented in the Gauntlet. And both those that got eliminated had a little bit of a rough time at the Gauntlet, not winning a single map. Right now, we're looking at XL2 taking on HSL, and I think XL2 impressed a lot of people while they were there, particularly speedily on that Doomfist, as well as the amazing OG beat, the BM. I love it. Lots of tactical crouching. It's exactly what I want to see out of Tier 2 Overwatch. XL2 did end up moving on after losing to Talon and Element Mystic, who were the other ones that moved on. And the other thing that's really interesting is that Talon Esports came in as an underdog. I'm going to go ahead and put that in quotations because they looked damn good during the Gauntlet yesterday, a couple days ago. They challenged Element Mystic. They took down XL2, and in my opinion, might be the 4th best team that we saw all over the last couple days. Talon definitely the one impressing, but I think in this group particularly, Element Mystic is the one that really started to show up. So when you come to an international event, the number one thing that a lot of people think about is Korea. It's South Korea. They're going to be dominating. They're going to be the ones that we have to worry about. And that's definitely been true for a lot of Overwatch. And it seems to be ringing true this time around as 3 out of the 4 teams that ended up in the top 4 in the winners bracket are all Korean. And so if that's a good summary of how things have gone so far. Definitely impressed with Talon here. Definitely impressed with Element Mystic. XL2, I think, exceeded expectations as well. KSP playing well, speedily playing well, but Element Mystic also playing damn good as well. So that's the first group. We're going to go ahead and talk about the second one. Unfortunately, we don't have videos. It hasn't been posted on the contender site just yet, but Legion, Envy, and Gen G advanced out of the next group, and LGE Huya got sent home. LGE Huya had a little bit of a rough time, a little bit of a rough go of it. So did HSL, not winning a single map and honestly getting wrecked throughout both of their games by Legion especially. And so with Legion and Envy moving on, that's 2 North American representatives moving on to the next round of games at the Gauntlet. Gen G looked good, man. Even though Envy almost reverse swept them, if it wasn't for Control, Gen G might not have won that first seed, but Gen G still looked very, very good and very clean through the majority of that game against Envy. It was a very good game to watch. It was pretty exhilarating, as I think a lot of Envy fans, after they went down 0-2, thought this is over, but then they gave us hope, just like Envy always does. And Envy, if you look through their history, the interesting thing about Envy is that they've always had a little bit of a hard time on Control. When they lost their golden season against Triumph during the regular season of Contenders North America, it was on Control. When they lose, or when they look like they're about to lose, it's usually on Control. And unfortunately, the 5th map against Gen G came down to, you guessed it, Control. So Gen G ended up winning out on that group. Envy took down Legion twice. Legion took down LGE Huya, who really had a hard go of it. The support player, I believe Molly, had a rough time on Moira, and it's just unfortunate that some of these players who looked so good on Zenyatta in the past are now having to play Moira. It's kind of like Brig Jail in a sense, but as a lesser, I think, a lesser kind of pain. It's not as torturous for them, but I don't know. I don't play Moira. But that's what's interesting about Gauntlet so far is the two regions that lost their respective region spots, that's China and Europe, also lose out first. And so now that we're going into the next round, I'm really intrigued to see how the two teams that we haven't seen yet, Runaway and Atlanta Academy, fare, because anything could happen at this point. I think a lot of games ended up being closer than one might have expected. Not all the games have been clean either, so it's been super scrappy so far between a lot of these teams. And the teams that are going to be able to kind of clean it up throughout the series and throughout this bracket are going to be the ones that end up on the top. I have high hopes for Atlanta Academy. I chose Runaway to win and a lot of other content that I've been able to do, but Genji looked really good. Element Mystic can look good. We never know what's going to happen in that lower bracket, especially now that every team has been able to play on stage once already. Hopefully some of those nerves have been able to be shaken off and they're going to be able to perform really well when they get there. The next thing that we're going to talk about is viewership. So the very interesting thing for me is that viewership has been chaotic throughout the Gauntlet. And yeah, it's in South Korea. The early games at 8 o'clock seem to be hitting a pretty good stride, especially when we do get hosted on the front page of Twitch. I think the highest I saw was about 12 to 13,000. The unfortunate thing about this is that was when I first started casting contenders in my very first season. I remember getting about 10,000. Maybe that was a pipe dream. Maybe I remember it incorrectly, but that was the average back in the day. Now the average seems to be anywhere from like 1 to 4, and I'm talking about North American contenders specifically. But here at the Gauntlet, we really wanted things to expand. We really wanted things to increase in value and have more people there and have more eyes, because this is the showcase, right? This is legitimately the future of the Overwatch League right in front of our eyes. It's the same thing as watching the University of Alabama versus the University of Clemson in the national championship. You're going to see future stars, the Baker Mayfields of the world, the Tuas of the world. College football will be professional NFL players one day. And the Gauntlet is the same exact thing. It's one of the biggest and sometimes only opportunity that some of these players have at showcasing exactly who they are to the general public. I think the teams that are really good at scouting, like the Atlanta Reign or Boston Uprising, have already known some of these players participating in Gauntlet a little bit more than some others, but we really wanted this to be at a broader general audience. And unfortunately, that doesn't seem to be happening quite as much as I personally would like, unless we're hosted on the front page. I would have loved for Overwatch League to host us on their main channel. For some reason, that's not happening. But when we're on the front page, it gets over 10,000. And I just really want Tier 2 to be supported. And the way that we do that is by getting viewers and by getting eyes on the scene. So if anyone's watching right now can support it, definitely post that link when it's on. Talk about it with your friends and make sure to show off who your favorite are in these who these players are on these teams. And the reason why I say that is, as I'm going through these monologues, I have a lot of thoughts about this kind of stuff, especially in Tier 2, because I've always considered Tier 2 very interesting Wild West, because as opposed to Overwatch League, where the casting personalities are very popular and they do speak a lot for the league, there are definitely some players that are able to do just that. Shore4 comes to mind immediately in my mind, that are able to have a voice in the world. But in Tier 2, it's a little different. Some of the best players and the best teams don't have 15,000 followers. Some of them don't even have 500 followers. And unfortunately, that means finding a player voice in Tier 2 isn't as easy as it is for the casting personalities and the on-air personalities to represent. But I think in order to really prop up what we need in Tier 2, we really need those voices of those players to come up and be highlighted. And the Gauntlet is exactly how you're able to do that. The trash talking is a little interesting in those packages for the Gauntlet. It's a little cringe at times, but sometimes it's funny. And I think it adds a little bit to the luster, the kind of character of a Tier 2, and they're trying their best. But really, in order for this to be successful, there needs to be some type of pattern, some type of way to get these players out there more, right? Make sure that on your profile pictures you have your picture, right? Because you're going to end up being a brand eventually, especially if you go into Overwatch League, and you got to put yourself out there. And the ones that put themselves out there are probably going to be a little bit more successful than the ones that don't. We try our hardest as on-air personalities to represent as best as possible, but in order for everyone to do it, the players need to be represented a little bit more as well. And the way to do it is by talking about it, right? Post your opinions on Twitter. together, post, let's all talk to each other. We're all in this together. We're all one big happy family, and we're all here to support Tier 2. And that's why the Gauntlet is so important. This was our chance. This is our one shining moment, just like the NCAA tournament. And it's time for us to shine. The players are going to shine, and not just the Korean players. I think Atlantic Reign's going to do great. I think Speedily and OG have already made a name for themselves, and everyone else that's still in it can do it too. Patafan's another one that comes to mind for talent, and these are names that we're going to say for the coming years in the Overwatch community, and we got to make sure that people know about them. That's all I have to say. So the other thing that I want to talk about too, just in general, is again support Tier 2, and I think Runaway is going to win, but we talked about Tier 2, but now let's talk about Overwatch League, because Overwatch League is why a lot of people know about Overwatch, and eventually these Tier 2 players will be going on into Overwatch League, and there's been a ton of free agency moves. I'm not going to talk about all of them. I'll talk about the ones that I personally wanted to talk about, because it's my show, I get to choose. But the first thing that we're gonna see is the Toronto Defiant first up. So the reason why I wanted to talk about this is because Gods, IM37, Sharik, and Aid have all been released from the Defiant, and Gods, IM37, and Sharik all came from Tier 2. This is another proof that if you're in Tier 2 right now, you can make it into Overwatch League. Gods was on second wind, IM37 was as well, and I'm blanking on where Sharik was, but he was a very, very solid tank. Gods played so very well on D.Va when he was in Overwatch Contenders on a variety of different teams, but mostly when he kind of had a second coming. You like that? On D.Va on the second wind. And the reason why I say this one more time is IM37 is known to have the fastest speed run in Overwatch League history. He played 1 week in Contenders and then got promoted to the main roster of Defiant. They all got a little bit of play time, but in the end, I don't think the meta really helped them out. Sharik was a very, very, very good Reinhardt. Gods, again, was a very, very good D.Va. And those are two characters that we don't really see anymore. And unfortunately, in terms of need, they don't really need to be on the Defiant right now. And if people are concerned that people are getting released, it's for good reason in terms of business. So I've been lucky enough in my time here in esports to make sure that I understand the business side of things too. I've worked in the game industry for a long time. Before I came into esports, I worked in sales for a game company. I sold things to Disney, and I understand the business aspect of this. And if I'm thinking with my business brain, and I'm one of these Overwatch League teams, there's a big thing happening next season, and that's home and aways, right? Those are those homesteads, and everyone's going to be traveling so much. And every player that's extra that you might not need, that's going to be traveling with you, is thousands upon thousands of dollars of flights, various other kinds of travel, food, housing, and when they're not going to be playing that much and they're not completely necessary for that team, you're saving all of that money to reinvest into your team, and that's something that Toronto Defiant really need to do, as well as some other teams that we're going to talk about. So while it sucks, right, it's good for the longevity of the league. Unfortunately, it's not the best for these players. For players like Gods and IM37, I'm not super familiar with Aid, and Sharik, there's possibilities for them to come back into the Overwatch League. Gods is known throughout as a very cool guy, and I'm sure he's going to be able to find a home, whether it be an Overwatch League and Contenders again. But I assume that when Contenders comes back in 2020, there's going to be a lot more former Overwatch League players in Korea, in North America, really anywhere, because I hope that they put a little bit more emphasis on how to develop talent as opposed to just finding it. It's not just about scouting. It's seeing the potential in someone who's not quite good right now and developing them into someone who is going to be a star for you. And that's what Contenders is also here for. Again, we're doing that for the Gauntlet, and I think Gods, IM37, and Sharik are really good examples of how you can find that talent, but once you have them, you still need to continue to develop it. And unfortunately for them, they aren't going to be able to be on that team going into the home games starting next season. And then for our World Championships, they're also going through a little bit of a change. It's someone who is OG on the team. It's going to be Nevix, who was released from the San Francisco Shock. A lot of them say he was a good voice for the team. I'll go over this pretty quickly, but at the end, he didn't have a ton of play time, and I think he's going to be able to find a home at somewhere else. Unfortunately, for a lot of these players, I don't want this to happen. I don't want what happened to someone like Elk to happen like to Nevix, right? When they don't have a ton of play time, he might be able to scrim with the shock a little bit more. But if you're unfamiliar with the Elk situation, before they changed the two-way player rules, where two-way players are who gets to play for Overwatch League teams and who gets to play for contenders teams, before they changed the rules, you could only play 2 games of Overwatch League, and then you couldn't play in contenders anymore. And so Fusions was lucky enough to be signed by Boston so he could continue playing for Overwatch League. And unfortunately for Elk, he played his 2 games and he couldn't play anymore. And then he just didn't he couldn't play at a competitive level in Overwatch League or contenders. And a lot of his, I think, skill, just because he wasn't warm anymore, because he wasn't facing the highest caliber talent week after week, he has a lot to make up. And when you go to Korea and Fusion University kind of bombs out and they're contenders, I think that's good proof of what can happen when you're not playing. So hopefully Nevix was able to stay warm. He was on the best team in the league. They are world champions. So he definitely has potential to go somewhere else. And the other thing that a lot of people aren't talking about when it comes to a lot of these players, especially these old guard players, is the potential for them to go into coaching roles, which is something that we don't really have in Overwatch League just yet. We don't have that player coach, the one that played back in college or played back in the NFL and then became an award-winning coach. Because while you don't have to be a player, just like how you don't have to be a player to be a good color caster, you don't have to be a former player to be a good coach. But what it does is it does provide one type of opinion, one type of point of view that isn't available if you don't have that person. And why not, right? I'm not saying coaches are going to be, players are going to be better coaches. I think you got to have all of those opinions. But when you're able to come through and when you're able to say, I know what it feels like to be in that chair that you're sitting at right now, and I know what it feels like to be successful, and I know what it's like to fail in that very chair, you're going to be able to speak in a more empathetic and hopefully in an easier way for them to hear. So I could definitely see people like Ryu Jae-hong or Nevix or any of our, old Apex players that are struggling to find teams right now go into the coaching world, maybe as an assistant coach as first and then head coaches later, because we also need a pipeline of coaches. Contenders has that too, but former players have an opportunity to become coaches as well. So that's enough about Nevix. Let's talk a little bit about some players, some coaches now that we've gotten on that subject, because Bare Hands was released from Mayhem and is replaced by Ye, who's a journeyman in the Tier 2 community and the Overwatch community as well. I think this is a great pickup. Bare Hands, he was the general manager for all intents and purposes. He had a lot to do with Mayhem, and there was a thing with Mayhem Academy that got really, that had me pretty frustrated with it. At first they said they weren't going to have an all-Korean roster, and then they ended up doing it anyway. They cut the most successful part of Florida Mayhem ever, which was Mayhem Academy, the #1 seed, the team that beat Fusion University in contenders for the very first time ever. Fusion University won 30 games in a row before Mayhem Academy beat them. Players like Mangachu were on this team. Fact Fiction was on this team. So Overwatch League players were on this team, and then they cut them after a 6-1 season. And basically what it did was it kind of made me upset, because it was like, hey, you guys did everything right. You beat a team that was unbeatable. You guys were the #1 seed, even though you didn't make it to Showdown because you got upset in the playoffs. You did everything right, and this is how we're going to reward you, by having all of you try to struggle to look for teams. A lot of those players ended up moving on to the Revival, and they didn't do quite as well as the Mayhem Academy did, only winning 1 game throughout the whole contender season last season. I know they're doing tryouts right now, and they're going to be back for Open Division and contenders coming up soon, but I just didn't like the lesson that taught, right? It's like, hey, you did everything right, and you're still going to get fired pretty much. And Bare Hands, I'm sure, had something to do with the decision. It might have been financial. I did talk about being involved in the business aspect of just the business side of things of the tech and gaming world. And I understand what it would be like to hold a team that you can't keep going to the best of your ability while also struggling with your Overwatch League team at the time. And it might have been too many balls in the air at once, and that might have been the reason. But Bare Hands, I think, also could have been ready for a change as well. I think he's got a good reputation in the Overwatch community. I got to meet the guy at a New Year's party when I was in Burbank back last year. I can't believe it's almost New Year's again, but in the end, I'm sure he'll find a home. A lot of people respect him and what he's done. And I wonder if he's going to move into a GM role somewhere else or coach somewhere else, or maybe take a break, because you got to also think about that. Sometimes when you're in a world for so long, like Bare Hands has, it can be hard to remember what it is like to not be involved. And sometimes that's really great too. But hopefully he does find a team. I think he can find some success in Overwatch League. Unfortunately, a player that couldn't find as much success as a lot of people thought they were going to find was Flower from NYXL. So he is a free agent, I believe, right now. And this guy came in with such hype that people thought that he would just immediately take over the league. But unfortunately for Flower and a lot of other hit scan DPS players, it just didn't really work out for him. Being a hit scan DPS player right now is rough unless you're Sharp. There's a really great video, a Twitch clip of Sharp getting nanoed and playing Widowmaker and shooting people with in his Sigma's Gravitic Flux. So you can play the Widow, but it's not the best choice 95% of the time. And unfortunately for players like Pine and Flower and other people in the in this DPS world, it was not the greatest thing for them. And so he's going to be looking for free agency, maybe going back to contenders. We never know what the meta is going to be. And so if the meta is going to be a little bit more friendly to his play style and his hero pool, we might see him in Overwatch League again. But as of right now, he is not on a team. And so let's go ahead and finish things off, because we got to talk about Mayhem, because they just released a ton of people, a half dozen amount of people, and that's a lot at once. It's a lot of adjusting to go all at once, like I said. So these releases, I think, are all players, just like I said, kind of fall into the God Sharik category, where it's more of a business decision too. Unfortunately, they didn't have as much impact as they needed to in order to travel with the team going into next season. Again, it's tough to say this, but you got to look at each one of these players as dollar signs, right? Either how much they're spending on these players or how much these players are bringing in. So let's go ahead and look at the Houston Outlaws real quick as a really good example of how team success doesn't necessarily mean you're not making money, right? Because you've got players like Jake, you got players like Raucus who are very good. And I think the Fusion are like this too, with Poco and EQO and Carpe, where the brand is really sellable, right? In terms of product, the Outlaws sell a lot of stuff, right? And so what is success, right? What's bringing in the money? For the Outlaws, it's the players and their personalities, right? Not necessarily the winning. You want to be able to do both, but the players represent money. And for Houston, those players are bringing in enough money to probably counteract any type of dividend that they're losing for not winning, right? And they're going to be able to bring them all over the world because they have a rabid fan base. They've been able to ingrain themselves into a lot of people's minds, and they're a lot of people's favorite team, right? Unfortunately for Mayhem, they haven't really quite done that. If I were to ask anyone in chat right now, what is the Mayhem's personality, right? What do the Mayhem look, think, and act like, right? Who is their star? It might be a little bit difficult to answer. And so while I like their staff pickups like Thippledork and Anton, one of the greatest graphic designers Overwatch League has ever seen, the big thing here is that they need to find themselves an identity, because we can't assume that these teams are all going to be here forever over the next 15 years, right? If a team like Mayhem aren't successful for the next 2 years and they're just hemorrhaging money because they're not making it up in apparel or branding or sponsorships, why, if I'm an investor, why keep that team on in general? So they need to find success, and cutting a little bit of the fat first is probably one of the best ways to do that. And so you can make a nice little team. They were successful in stage 4, so there's definitely a possibility there. But now that, again, we're traveling all over the world and each player is going to require a certain amount of investment to keep on the team, you have to make it worth it. And unfortunately for these players, it wasn't quite worth it for Mayhem. But I really hope, I think that with the social stuff that Mayhem has been doing, it's Thibault and Anton are great at it. And so if you're looking for a team that wants an identity, right? Another good example of a team that's not Houston with identity is Hangzhou, right? With their graphics and with their anime posters before each game, and the Rain do a lot of really good content, right? It gives their players a voice, and I hope Mayhem are going to be able to find that voice themselves, because it won't do anything other than help their cause. And so now that we've talked about free agency a little for a little while now, what I do want to talk about too is what does free agency mean, right? A lot of teams seem to be cleaning house. I've talked about at length about why that would be a big deal in terms of business. And unfortunately, if you're fans of these players, you're gonna have to find them on other teams and continue to support them, right? Just because your favorite player is not on a team anymore doesn't mean you can't support them. And they need your support in this time of transition. Just like when you at home don't have a job, or if any players are watching right now, when you're in between teams, it sucks, right? And you just got let go, and that sucks too, right? For anyone who's been let go or had to leave a job or forced to resign, right? It sucks. And so these players still need your support, and we're all here for it, right? But free agency is a healthy part of any sport. It's honestly one of my favorite parts of all sports, right? The week before the trade deadline, where in the NFL, where everyone gets traded, right? Where there's going to be 10 to 15 different trades, big time trades. It's really important. And different teams have different strategies for free agency. So again, for your meatball, the meat sports people, so for your for as an example, it's like, all right, there's different ways to handle free agency, right? There is the purposeful tanking, right, that the Browns and currently the Dolphins are doing. So what that is, if you're unfamiliar, it's purposely taking a team that isn't good, that isn't going to win, because in 2 years you're going to have enough money to buy superstars, right? Teams that have been successfully able to do this have been the Golden State Warriors from about a decade ago, because when they won their first championship, they were the team of teamwork, right? They were the team of no stars, and then they became a dynasty, right? They were not very good for a very long period of time beforehand. So it's important to know that, like, just because your team's losing out doesn't mean they're not going to be successful. Unfortunately for Overwatch League, you might not have that time. Esports is a very inconsistent type of atmosphere. Things change so quickly, and if you don't stay on top of the wave, you're going to drown. And these teams might not have enough forethought, or might not have the ability to do something like save money for a couple seasons and then just buy a team like the Vancouver Titans did, right? And so, or just buy superstars to fill. And sometimes when you have a bunch of superstars on a team, it doesn't work, right? And so we've seen that happen in the NBA. Maybe they'll make the playoffs, but sometimes championships, even with superstar caliber, don't come through. And that's just one strategy. The other thing about free agency that's really interesting is sometimes a player's on a team that you might not like and is on a rival, and you get to bring it back and create storylines. And what esports needs is consistent storylines. I've always said that I'd love for Overwatch to get a little bit closer to the WWE. I love trash talk. I love the spiciness that people bring when it's true, right? Or when it's good. And what I mean by when it's good, it's not just like, someone whispering into a mic, oh, this player is bad and I'm good, right? It's when they go for the jugular and there's emotion behind it. And what free agency does is it creates emotions in a lot of these teams, whether it be because of success or future failure, but also player to player. And casters and marketing people are going to be able to use these storylines to advertise their teams and advertise the league. And that's really, really good for Overwatch League in general. And this is something that I'm really excited about. Free agency is a volcanic situation. There is nothing that sometimes makes sense. Certain moves will be busts. Certain moves will seem like busts and then become huge successes. Other moves will seem like a success, and things might turn out differently. But in any sport, it's very, very important that free agency maintains a very healthy life within its community. The other thing is a pipeline of talent. That's contenders. Like I said before, I hope contenders gets a little bit more investment coming up. But now that we're here in free agency, it's our first kind of like real one with a bunch of teams. New teams might come into the league later. We might see it a little bit more. Contenders players might enter free agency as well in terms of getting picked up. Trades will happen. If you saw Mr. X's article on overwatchleague.com, it lists everyone who is on option. And the other thing about free agency is who's not participating in it, right? And this is what I'm talking about in terms of storylines, because we could talk about the Dallas Fuel right here, because there are a lot of people out there that like it when the Dallas Fuel are talked in a very positive light. But Sideshow has already covered this. They're rumored to be one of the highest paid teams in the entire Overwatch League, and everyone is under contract, so they're locked in, right? They're not going to be able to shop as much as some other teams, because if they do, it's just going to be in addition to. They're not going to be able to do what Mayhem did or what Toronto did and save a little money to find someone else. They're just going to have to take that cost because everyone's already under contract. And so you got under contract. There's team option, which is where teams are going to be able to decide whether to keep a player or not. And then there's full free agents, which is you've been released. Any team could kind of talk to you right now. And it's just really cool as a traditional sports fan to see this and see this continue to grow and see how this goes, because free agency is always full of drama. And then one last thing too, that I'm super interested to see, maybe not this season, but in a future season, maybe in like 2 or 3 years, is holdouts. So in football and stuff, Ezekiel Elliott held out to get more money. Right. There's a lot of players in the NFL, not a lot. There's a handful of players in the NFL and NBA that'll hold out on a contract to try to argue for more money. I'm very interested to see if we'll ever see that in the in Overwatch League. I think that will be really, really interesting. And I'm seeing in chat right now that is a rumor. So the Contenders team, it was rumored that Overwatch League teams were required to have Contenders teams, but that is just a rumor, not been confirmed. It still might be true. 2020 is still far away, and we can get it confirmed there. But yeah, so now is going to be a time where I talk a little bit more about like my feelings of the state of Overwatch, and then we'll get to some China and Hong Kong talk a little later, because I feel pretty passionate about saying something in this situation. So I'm going to take a little quick water break real quick, everyone. I'm going to warn you, because I've been talking for 30 minutes straight. Got to wet that mouth. All right, so basically this is just like a general state of Overwatch, right? It's been, as an Overwatch fan, it's been moderately frustrating to kind of see things come and go, right? Especially with the rate of balance patches, because in Overwatch, I can speak on Contenders mostly, where a whole regular season will be played on one patch, and then the playoffs will be played on a completely different patch. In my opinion, like, I'd rather just the whole thing be played on one patch, and that way teams can really live in it, because then it's just like 2 different seasons. It kind of nullifies what happens in the regular season. And so going into Overwatch League Season 3, I hope they find a little bit more consistency in terms of patching. I've loved Roll Q, so it's been one of my favorite patches so far, but unfortunately, it's turned a lot of DPS streamers into Minecraft streamers on Twitch. And again, if we want this league to be long and have that life, we need to see Overwatch. And if you look at the numbers, the only times that really the numbers are high is when someone like Aspen is streaming, and even when you have a DPS player, they're playing something else a lot of the time. So hopefully they're going to be able to handle those long queue times a little bit sooner rather than later, because even in the dreads of Plat, where I'm at right now, it can still take a while. And the worst thing is if you're waiting an hour for a queue and someone DCs, or someone took a break, or someone went and got food because you don't quite know when these games are coming, then you just have another bad game, and it's like 2 hours before you get into a game. And so I'm sure they're aware, they're trying to change things, and we'll get there. I have the hope. But the other thing that we have to think about too is, as a community, how much control the devs have in terms of what we want in a patch versus what they want in a patch, because it's really dangerous for a game to listen. This is going to sound really bad, but it's really dangerous for a game to constantly listen to their community, because when you're constantly reacting to what the community wants, you start losing the identity of your game, right? It just becomes a reaction to whatever the biggest complaint is. And that's not something that is healthy for any esport or any game in general. And so I think the devs are in a very interesting position where a lot of voices in Overwatch are loud, but at the same time, do they have the data? Do they have the ability to truly understand and truly see what is going on in the game? Goats is a really good example of this, right? The community was very vocal about Goats, and it's so funny now because almost everyone I talk to kind of misses it, right? There's a ton of particles in the current patch. There's a ton of shielding, and it's like the whole point of the game right now almost is to break through shields and find picks that way, right? Get to your flux, and it's starting to feel a little bit like Goats again. And the reason why I say that, it's like, Sigma ults, and then you use sound barrier, and then that dance is starting to really come through, right? Even though the meta right now is, I still think I've had a great time casting it. Goats seem to be that nuance that a lot of, I think, like the chess players or like the high brain players really enjoyed. But as we've continued on, we don't want things to feel stale, so we want more patches, but at the same time, you don't want patches to change things in the middle of a tournament. Basically, I'm saying this is to say how hard it is to live in this world and have a rabid fan base that has huge opinions while also trying not to break the game at the same time. So basically, it's just like, it's hard to win here. There is no answer. I hope that the patch coming up is going to help with the shield meta. I liked dive back in the day. Double sniper was my least favorite, if anyone is interested to know that. But in general, you don't want the community to control how the game goes. Even though the community might think they know what they want, sometimes that's not the case. But at the same time, as a developer, you can't not listen to them, and you got to meet in the middle. And sometimes you don't get all the changes that you want, and it's a good thing where your devs stand their ground and make the changes that they think the game needs. But I think this next patch shows a really good move in the right direction in terms of giving everyone a little bit of something, right? It might not change everything, but it definitely feels like it's in the right direction. Granted, we did have a couple of those during the GOATS phase. Ended up being like a single character that was really breaking things. It was Brig, even though by the right before 2.2.2, GOATS was starting to come a little, like fall off just a little bit with characters like D.Va not really showing any play. But now this patch feels really good. And if you guys have read the patch notes, again, it just feels good. And hopefully the Halloween event comes through on the next patch as well. And the next thing I want to talk about too, just once more, since it is my passion, we talked about it a lot at the beginning of the show. It's tier 2. I was very lucky last week. It feels like a year ago at this point, to cast the LAN, and I got to meet a lot of people from tier 2 Overwatch, specifically from Center of Bermuda, as well as Tea Party. And what was so cool about it was, again, it was so cool to finally put a face to the names of a lot of these players, and to be able to cast them and cast the growing scene. And if you're not required to watch tier 2, but if you really want Overwatch League to be super successful and you want new stars to come, us as fans can't help that. There are a couple really great people. Ace of Spades was awesome. Shane was awesome. There is a kid, Fozman, that I really like. The man, Fozman, who played for Tea Party. I got to meet Carter, got to meet, Guru, a lot of players, and all of them shared one thing, and what they all shared was the love and passion for this game. No one in tier 2 does it for the money. No one in tier 2 does it for because I'm going to go back to the money. I couldn't come up with the second one, but no one does it because it's easy, right? It is one of the hardest career paths that you can take. You get paid in exposure a lot. You get paid in BlizzBucks a lot. So if you're participating in tier 2, you're making a lot of sacrifices. You're either struggling. You might be struggling in school because the balance can be hard, and some of these players have to choose eventually, right? Because just like my parents, if I was 19 and I said I'm going to drop out of school for a semester and pursue video games, my parents would call me crazy. And a lot of these players have to be making those decisions because they want to pursue something that they're passionate about. And that's something that I really respect about tier 2 in general. Is in 10 years, when they might be in accounting, or when they might be in sales, or when they might be Overwatch League players, they're not going to say 10 years ago, I didn't go for it, right? These kids are going for it right now, and we have to reward them for that. And so basically, for everyone that's watching, everyone in the chat right now, post it on Twitter, post who your favorite tier 2 person is, and support these kids and these men and these girls and these women, because without them, there's no Overwatch League in about 5-6 years. So that's my little ramble on tier 2. And now it's going to be the tough one for me. So I don't think you can talk about Blizzard right now without talking about what happened at Hearthstone. So before I go, I'm probably going to pontificate again for a long time. I'm going to warn you, I'm going to wet my mouth one more time. So this thing is a shitty situation, right? There is no... Basically, if you're not aware, there was a Hearthstone player, Blitzchung, that wore a gas mask on his finals interview. He won a tournament, won $100,000, and he said something to the tune of "Liberate Hong Kong." Right? This is the biggest of our times, right? And in response, almost immediately, Blizzard suspended him for a year, took away his winnings, and also fired the casters. And while this is frustrating, right? I think it requires a little bit of history as to see why they would make the decision. And before anyone makes any assumptions on what I think about this, what I want to say is I'm thinking about this as a devil's advocate right now as to why this is happening. Because a lot of, I think, viewers in Overwatch League might not understand what Tencent is and how much power this particular company has over gaming all over the world. So there's a lot of resources that you can go look up. Slasher has done a lot of interviews recently that kind of have a spark notes of this, but if you're really interested in it, do your own research and educate yourself on it, because it's really it's honestly pretty interesting. So there's a company, Tencent. It literally represents, I think, 55% of all mobile gaming and gaming in China. It owns over half of the market. Two companies, NetEase and Tencent, own 65% of gaming in China. It is a multi-billion-dollar industry. I believe Tencent is valued at $500 billion, which is money that we're never going to see. We're never going to see. There's no way to know what that kind of money looks like, right? But the reason why I mention that too is because Tencent owns a share of Ubisoft, Epic. It owns, I think, all of Riot, and it owns 5% of Activision as well. So basically, if you play a game, Tencent owns part of the company that you're playing it on, right? There are Chinese companies that own parts of Bungie. There are Chinese companies that own a ton of indie developers, right? When I was working at a game company, Chinese companies came and wanted art and wanted gameplay ideas because copyrights aren't as important over in China, so you can make games that have already been made and sell them for China. And what this has done is that China has slowly but surely crept their way into owning a major part of our gaming culture. Not only that, it's also the fastest growing scene in esports, right? It makes billions of dollars. It's a faster growing scene than South Korea right now. It's definitely faster than the US, it's faster than Europe, and it's faster than South Korea. And the Chinese market 10 years ago, you'd be crazy not to invest in, right? But again, what has been able to happen is a company like Blizzard sees that there's a chance to sell millions of dollars worth of product in a country to potentially make their company better, right? And they create something that is specifically for a Chinese market, and that's Diablo Immortal. Right. And this is where things start kind of, I think, coming up into the forefront and coming up into the public, where we started kind of noticing that, hey, we didn't want this. This is not necessarily something that the community wanted. And this is very not Blizzard right now, because we all remember, don't you all have phones? Right. And in this situation, Tencent owns, again, over 50% of gaming in China, owns parts of almost every major studio here in North America. They have the fastest growing market, and basically it's the Wild West. There's so much money there that companies in America were able to receive that money and create some of the games that we love and enjoy. Right. I'm sure some of that money is part of Overwatch. I'm sure some of that money is part of Fortnite and all of these other games that we know and love. But what this means is that North American companies now, or not just North American, Ubisoft's European, these companies no longer have leverage. And leverage is the key word here, because Tencent owns it, right? Tencent and China own a lot of the stock of these companies. So when they want something, all of a sudden, we as fans of Blizzard don't really have a voice anymore, because our voice has been taken away. And this is the first time I think a lot of people have felt that something has happened to them and say, hey, this isn't representative of me. And this company doesn't represent what I believe anymore because of what happened to this player from Hong Kong. And it's because Blizzard has no leverage. There's a reason why Blizzard apologized to China first. There's a reason why Bobby Kotick and Jalen Brack have not mentioned this at all. And if you want to be a little frustrated, Kotick posted 22 hours ago something about Call of Duty, right? So he's been on social media. He's had an opportunity to speak to the people, but he decided to speak on the new Call of Duty franchises instead. And again, when you have a company that has no leverage and doesn't even attempt to speak for you as a person, that's going to be frustrating. And so people like Kibler, people like Grums, I believe, people like Crip, who have gone out there and said, "Hey, this is not cool. This is not what I represent, and I'm out," right? They have the means to do that, and I respect their decision. And unfortunately for Blizzard, their hands are tied, right? They can't do anything about it. They might believe and support this player from Hong Kong, but it doesn't matter because they have no leverage anymore, and that's business. And so now, me personally, it doesn't matter if it's business, right? These are human rights that are being talked about and stomped on. These are people that are losing, their livelihoods and losing their lives potentially by fighting for something that they believe in. And no amount of money is worth that, in my opinion. So coming onto the show today was really hard. I wanted to try to educate y'all about why the business decision was made and why it doesn't matter, because I remember last year at BlizzCon, they showed a video of people from the LGBT community. They showed a video of people from the trans community, the non-binary community, the cisgender community, from all walks of life, saying that we can all be Blizzard, right? You cannot be selective about what you support and what you don't support. I'm a part of the LGBTQ community. It's something that I don't really say very often. When I talk about my husband, it's something that I say in casual conversation, but I try very, very hard not to put it in your face and try to be a good example, right? But there's a reason why I feel that way, and it's because I'm not necessarily 100% comfortable putting that out there all the time, right? And that's a decision that I have made. But when I saw that video last year, I could feel a little bit more comfortable saying I'm represented in this company. But then something like this happens, and I can't help but think about Pride. And I can't help but think about the shirts that they were able to sell, and all the apparel that they were able to sell, and all the in-game items that they were able to sell because of my community, because of the support that people wanted to give my community, the LGBTQ, IA plus community. You can't be selective about what you support and what you don't support. And it's pissing me off, man. And it's made me very, very angry because all of that, in my opinion, has been nullified. All of that means nothing to me. I feel like I was used as a means for a company to make more money to support a government that doesn't necessarily care about me either, right? That would lock me up in some other countries just because I have a husband or for who I love, right? And that feels really, really bad. I'm going to give them a little bit of time because Blizzard is a company that's been near and dear to my heart. Here's the Storm is why I met my husband and why I like have a lot of the friends that I have. There's too much emotion attached to it for me to immediately give it up, right? I want to support these tier 2 players as well, and I can't do that if I just wipe my hands of it, because I also want to fight for them, and being in the community and fighting is exactly how you do it too. And that's what I want to tell everyone here, is that I support you. I support the protesters in Hong Kong. And no matter who you are, I want you to know that you are loved. And if you need anything, let me know, because that's what I want Blizzard to represent. And I need to represent that myself. I need to walk the walk in order to show other people how to do it as well. And so that's it for me. That's it for the monologue. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. It's been a lot of boop. That's a lot of my voice, about 45 minutes of it. But I wanted to speak from the heart today. I don't get a lot of opportunity to just speak to the people, especially by myself. We usually have guests on. We're going to have Samudo on next week, who's a pretty awesome streamer. I'm really excited for that. But in the end, that's been what's going on in Overwatch. I want to thank you all for listening and participating in the chat, and again, supporting me in this show and supporting Tier 2. But everyone, that's been what's happening in Overwatch lately. We'll see you next week.